Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 11-year-old Jaquita Mack. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that I actually learned about due to an Instagram page. I cannot think of the name of it for the life of me, but I will put it up on the screen here. And this page had featured Jaquita's case, obviously, is how we got from A to B, which A is finding the page and B is me talking about it. And basically, as soon as I saw her face, I knew I wanted to read about her. Something in her smile just completely broke my heart because I knew that she was no longer alive. And then to read about what happened to this girl is enough to break you as a person. I truly cannot imagine how her family is able to go through the day-to-day with the knowledge of what happened to their baby in their minds. I truly feel for these people because this case is it's just terrible. And today I'm going to tell you that entire story. I'm sorry in advance. I read all the things that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this: how does a person, a parent, somebody with their own daughter, go on to do to Jaquita what they did? And also, do you think that they deserved to be in prison for life or to have the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of 11-year-old Jaquita Mack. Our case today is going to begin on July 24th, 1999, and we are in Oakland, California. Specifically, we are in the 2200 block of Ransom Avenue. Well, we weren't there, obviously, but city workers were. These city workers were clearing out a field when they stumbled upon something that no human being should ever see. And that was the body of a young girl who was wrapped up in a white sheet and very clearly not alive. Immediately, the cops were called, and I can only imagine that when they got there, their stomachs just had to have dropped because this is a nightmare situation, right? Across the board, finding a child in this way is a nightmare. But when they saw her, they also had the knowledge that they had a pretty good idea who this girl was. And that's because the night before, a distraught family had contacted the police department to report that their 11-year-old child had gone missing after she went out to ride her bike in the Fruitvale district, which is where they lived in Oakland. And that was just 15 blocks away from this field where this body was being found. This was not the outcome that anyone was hoping for, but sadly it was the reality. 11-year-old Jaquita Mack had been murdered. She had been violated and brutalized before being dumped in this field like a piece of trash, a field that was used as a party spot for a lot of locals, and no one knew who could do something like this to an innocent child. Jaquita Mack was born on August 23, 1987 at St. Rose Hospital in Hayward to her mother Kenya and her father James, and was said to just be the most beautiful baby. Now, though Jaquita did have two parents, she didn't grow up with them. Her mother and father both had their own problems that they were dealing with, so pretty much from the moment she was born, she stayed with extended family. First with her grandmother until her grandmother passed away, which would have been when Jaquita was about 5 or 6, and from there she went on to stay with her aunt Verna, who ended up being her legal guardian. And I believe it was both she and her older brother Keena who were staying with her aunt Verna, and he was about 3 years older than her big brother. Jaquita was said to have been doing really well with her aunt. She was in school. She wasn't a straight A student, but she worked super hard, and she was loved by her teachers and her classmates. She was the type of kid who would often stay after class to help her teacher, and she spent a lot of time in summer school over the years. And if she had been in summer school this particular summer, which she was not, but if she had been, the day that she was killed, she was actually going to be receiving an award for winning a mathematics contest. Her teacher, Miss Moeller, said of her, and I quote, If I had to pick a favorite, which teachers aren't supposed to, she was the one. She had a lot of friends, but she always wanted to stay after school to help me. After Jaquita was killed, her fellow summer school kids, right, her peers, I was going to say her students. They were not her students. Her peers gathered at, it was a previously organized event that they were throwing for like their summer reading program, but they ended up morphing this also into a memorial for Jaquita, and the kids were asked to wear something purple because that was this little girl's favorite color. She was just a month away from turning 12, dude. She had so much to look forward to and to live for. Like, she was excited because she was going to be going to Six Flags. She was about to be going into the 6th grade, and she was super excited to be able to go to the 6th grade dance. She was just like a little girl, dude. She loved reading and mac and cheese and riding her bike and candy, and she was a singer. She reportedly had the voice of an angel, and she loved being in school plays. She was said to be thrifty and to be spunky. She had even taken some karate classes, and she was said to be a good, obedient child who like listened to the people who were in charge of her. And she wanted to go on to be either a famous person or the president of the United States, which arguably the president is also a pretty famous person. And I guess the year before she was killed, she had done like a school assignment where she had to write in her journal, and she wrote, quote, "My secret dream is to be a president for the United States, but people call me stupid, but I'm not. I think I am smart enough to be a president for the United States if I do my hardest and get a college degree, and by the time I am out, I will be smart as Miss Mueller and her mom, so if I want to be a president, I have to keep trying." Which, man, that just makes my heart swell. Like, I don't know who told this little girl she was stupid, because clearly she was anything but, and it just breaks my heart. She just seemed to be so sweet and smart, and she was doing so well. Like I said, she had spent a lot of time in summer school, but she had done so well at school the year prior that she didn't have to go to summer school. And she was so excited because that meant she was going to be able to spend that break visiting her parents in Oakland. So as I said, Jaquita was living with her aunt, Verna, and this was in Newark, California, which is about an hour away from Oakland. And Oakland is where her mother, Kenya, and James lived. Now, they were not a couple. They never got married. They weren't together, but they did live in the same house. I believe it was James's house, and Kenya rented a room there. Anyways, it was reported that around the summer of 1999, this is when Jaquita started to get close with her parents again. They started to talk. They started to want to reconnect and be in each other's lives more often, more frequently, and more substantially. And since Jaquita had done so well in school and didn't have to go to summer school, she went to her aunt and she told her, like, hey, I would like to go to Oakland to stay the summer with my parents. Now, Verna, when this was brought to her, she wasn't sure. She knew that her sister Kenya had her issues. She struggled with substance abuse, as did James. And so she wasn't sure about sending Jaquita there, right? Which is reasonable. But she sat down and she had a conversation with her, and Jaquita basically told her, like, this is my mom. You know, this is my mom. This is my dad. I want the opportunity to know them. So she begrudgingly agreed to let Jaquita go. And she arrived at her parents' home located at the 2900 block of East 29th Street on July 1st, 1999. She was literally there less than a month when she was killed. It was Friday, July 23rd, 1999, when 11-year-old Jaquita Mack went out to ride on her bike with the pink pedals and the green handlebars, and she was just riding around the neighborhood, having fun, being on her summer break. Now, what time exactly she left her parents' home and what she was doing during the day, I can't say for sure. But at about 8:45 p.m., her uncle saw her out riding her bike near the corner store, which was the B&W Market at Fruitvale Avenue and East 27th Street. Her uncle said that he saw her and he, waved her down and he told her, hey, like, you need to get home. It's getting late. It's 8:45 p.m. You're 11 years old. Go back to the house. And he said that she was like, okay. She rode her bike off in that direction. And that was the last time she was seen alive. Now, prior to this happening, at about 8 p.m., that's when Jaquita's father, James, realized that she was missing. So basically, he said there was some miscommunication about who was watching her that day. He thought she was with her mother, Kenya. So he reached out to Kenya. He actually paged her because of the 1999 of it all. And he waited. She called back and she's like, oh, I thought she was with a friend over at a friend's house playing Nintendo. But it turns out she wasn't. So with that, 3 hours later, Okay, at 11 p.m., the police were contacted and immediately a search began with family, friends, neighbors, police, bloodhounds, the whole nine, as they say. Her family somehow at this late hour was able to get missing persons flyers made, and they went up and put them on the poles and the bulletin boards at grocery stores that were still open. And they really had the whole community behind them because this neighborhood was like a friendly, working class, safe neighborhood, right? Even though it was Oakland, and Oakland does have like a reputation now for being not the safest place, which it could be said that a lot of places aren't the safest place. I actually like love Oakland. I've been there several times. I really fugs with Oakland, but the crime in that area had been sort of sneaking in. There'd been more violent crime. There'd been more drug-related crimes, and it was making like the residents who had lived there a long time nervous. But overall in this neighborhood, everybody watched out for everybody. Everybody knew everybody, and they kept their eyes on each other and like looked out for each other. So everybody came out to help this family. Now, things moved quickly here, especially considering how fast Jaquita's body was found, because she was reported missing at 11 p.m. on Friday, right? And by Saturday morning, her body was found in that field. So they did all of this in that short amount of time. And then just to have that be the resolution for her to be found in this like overgrown, dirty field that people used to party. So there were like beer bottles and things like that. And then this area later became the spot for her memorial and her candlelight vigil. And you know what else is super fucked here? Because like the whole case is fucked, is that her body was found on her mother Kenya's 33rd birthday. Happy birthday to her. She learns that her daughter is dead and that her father had to go and identify her body. And I'm so happy I've never been in that situation. People I know have, and it seems to be incredibly traumatizing, especially because of how she had been killed. She was strangled, so he saw strangulation marks on her neck, and he could see also that it looked like she had been beaten because she appeared to have a black eye. Now, immediately, Jaquita's murder sparked an enormous police investigation. The whole area was canvassed. Everybody was questioned. Jaquita's family, her parents, everybody in her parents' apartment building, everyone in neighboring apartment buildings, basically anyone who may have seen anything in that neighborhood that day was questioned. And it did bring a lot of anxiety to those who lived in the area. This was the first time many people in that area had experienced this type of situation, right? Like, this was not something as commonplace as, sadly, murder has become today. This was, 26 years ago now? Where is time? Anyways, one neighbor who lived nearby, I believe they lived 2 houses down, said that like this was a friendly place and they could not believe that something like this had happened so close to home. She said that now she and her husband were worried about their grandkids. They had grandkids that were 8 and 3. And she said at this point, she didn't want to let them go and play outside anymore. Like before, you were just letting your kids run around, play outside, be by themselves. And now she said she didn't want to let them go farther than their own backyard because you just never know. Another neighbor, a man named Kevin, who had known Jaquita basically from when she was born, said that he had just seen her. Like he had just talked to her because she had came over and asked to borrow his barbecue for a cookout. And he just couldn't believe that this could happen to somebody he knew. So somebody that like, it's to like the community's kid, you know what I mean? They all just wrap themselves up in each other. And the whole thing just made him sick. The whole thing makes me sick. A $20,000 reward was even posted for any information that would lead to the arrest of Jaquita's killer. $9,000 of that was coming from the Oakland Police Department. $1,000 of that was coming from Crime Stoppers. And then $10,000 of these dollars was coming from this couple. This was Carol and Francis Carrington. And they were the parents of a woman named Carol Son and the grandparents of Carol's daughter, Julie's son, who, along with a friend of Julie's, who was an exchange student from Argentina named Silvina Peloso, were murdered while on a sightseeing trip in Yosemite months before Jaquita's murder. Now, this case, the case of the murder of these 3 girls, horrific. I haven't looked into it fully, but I've read up on it a little bit. I haven't looked into it fully because I'm looking into cases constantly, and I don't know if I'm going to cover it. It's just like, it's a lot. And there are some videos on it. Let me know if you want me to cover it. I may. There are videos that already exist on the case, but horrific, because apparently these 3 women were killed, well, women and girls were killed by a serial killer named Carrie Anthony Stainer. And basically, for the briefest of synopsises, in March of 1999, Carol Yvonne Sutton, who was 42 years old, and Silvina Peloso, who was 16, okay, they were found in the trunk of Carol's rental car that had been set on fire. Carol, the adult here, she was strangled and shot And then Sylvina, the 16-year-old, was raped and then shot. And you may notice that I didn't mention Julie, which was Carol's daughter, and that's because she wasn't with them. She wasn't found in the burning car. A week after Carol and Sylvina's bodies were found, a note was sent to the police department, and the note contained a hand-drawn map that would lead police to the remains of Carol's 15-year-old daughter, Julie. And what's super fucked up here is at the top of this note, they wrote, quote, "We had fun with this one." The way I could cry and vomit. So police went to the location that was, indicated on this map, and there they did find the remains of this 15-year-old girl, Julie, who had been raped and her throat had been slit. So, again, absolute horrific nightmare situation. And it was the parents of Carol, the grandparents of Julie, who were contributing this money towards helping find Jaquita's killer, because they are just absolute solid human beings. So anyways, the reward was brought up to $20,000, which is a significant amount of money. And it was even about to be raised again to $40,000 right before Jaquita's killer was arrested. But before that happened, Jaquita's family had to bury her. And I cannot imagine burying your 11-year-old child. I truly can't even fathom what her family went through. They had an open casket, which, my God, her mother was inconsolable, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I mean, they're just sitting there and they're remembering her life. This is the same church where she had once sang in the choir. Jaquita was really big on church. I guess she had started going when she was like 3 years old, and she loved it. She loved singing in the choir. She loved God in general, and she would even take lead on reading the passages at Sunday school, and she loved to do that. Many people of the hundreds who attended wore purple ribbons because, remember, purple was Jaquita's favorite color. I guess she had even written a poem. I wish I could have read it. I just read about it. But she wrote a poem where she equated purple to beautiful things like dancing and irises, which, my heart. That's all I can say is my heart. How something happens like this is beyond me. Okay, how another person could hurt somebody in this way is completely beyond my comprehension. And then on top of it, this is a child. How a person could do this to a child makes zero sense to me. And then once you learn about this monster who did this to her, it's just, my God. Her family just had so many questions. The same questions I'm asking, how could a person do this to a child who's never harmed anyone in their lives, in her life, not in their lives, in anyone's life. She's never hurt anybody. And it's as time went on, they started to believe that this was somebody, it had to be somebody that she knew, because Jaquita was not the type of girl who would just get in the car with somebody she didn't know. She wouldn't go off with somebody she didn't know. She was a smart kid. She was street smart. She was the type of kid who would watch America's Most Wanted with her older cousin and strategize about how not to be a victim. But she had been, and now police were feeling the pressure to find out who was responsible. Now, police did have some leads, okay? They initially believed that the person who was responsible for Jaquita's death was one of the men who frequented the house she was staying at, her parents' house. And that's because, as I mentioned, Kenya and James both did struggle with substance abuse, specifically crack cocaine. And in addition to that, Kenya did do sex work. And because of that, because of those two things, there were often men coming in and out of that home, which is arguably not the safest place for a kid to be. Okay, I think that that's fair to say. But police were able to track down all of the men who had been coming and going from this house since Jaquita had been there. How? Science, bitch. I truly don't know, but they were able to track down all of these men. They were able to look into them. They were able to get DNA samples. They were able to take these DNA samples and test them against DNA that was recovered from inside of Jaquita. And they were able to rule them all out. Which, considering that was the angle that they were going on initially, it would seem like a big slap in the face that all of these men were excluded. But it turned out that wasn't the case, because this wasn't the only thing they had. Or rather, these men weren't the only people that police had their eyes on, okay? Because they were zeroing in on a guy. They were zeroing in on a guy who lived pretty close to the home that Jaquita was staying at, the home of her mother and father, okay? It was so close that if you were to stand on the porch, you could actually see this guy's apartment. And this guy had some conflicting statements about when or if he had seen Jaquita on the day that she went missing and was subsequently murdered. This man was a 24-year-old father of a toddler girl named Alex DeMolle. It'll be on the screen. You tell me. He was a former office supply warehouse worker who was unemployed at the time that Jaquita was killed. He was either married or in a long-term relationship with a woman who did work, so he was a stay-at-home dad for their 3-year-old daughter. Now, Alex, he was actually one of the first people that were interviewed when Jaquita's body was found. And when they spoke to him, he initially said that he wasn't home. Okay, when she went missing, he wasn't home. He had been out of town. But as police investigated further, interviewed people, more people were interviewed, right? More people who could see things and report the things that they saw. They found that in speaking to at least 2 different people, or they found out from 2 different people that they had seen him with their own eyes, not only home, but also with Jaquita the night she went missing and was killed. When police learned this, they questioned him a second time, and he completely changed his story. Now he was home, yes. And now he had seen Jaquita, yes. Not only had he seen her, he had helped her back onto her bike after she had fallen off her bike near the local store, the store where he would go to buy Black & Milds, and she would go to buy candy, the store where her uncle last saw her alive. So he was questioned several times, and police were starting to feel like they were on to something. So they got lucky. Okay, they probably could have gotten a warrant, but they got lucky in this case because for whatever reason, Alex begrudgingly agreed to give them a blood sample, to give them DNA. Now, why one would do this when they were guilty, I cannot say. But luckily, he did. He willingly gave up his DNA. And when they tested his DNA against the DNA that was found in Jaquita, it was a match, bro. It was a match. With that, he was taken into custody and he was informed that, hey, bro, your DNA is a match. And in learning this information, he confessed. He gave a taped confession in which he said that this was just a spur of the moment action on his part. And he confessed further in 3 letters that he wrote to people about what he did. It all happened so fast. He was brought into the station at like 9 a.m. and by noon he had confessed and written his letters. Apparently, the stick choked back sobs while he described the killing to police, where he told police that Jaquita was scared, that she was terrified. And when asked how he knew that she was, he said that he could tell by her face. He said that she was petrified, whimpering, and crying. And then he said specifically, quote, I was really so sorry. And then I was thinking about my daughter at the same time and my family and how embarrassing this would be if I got caught. With that, 2 weeks after Jaquita was murdered, Alex DeMolle was arrested and he was held without bond. And police basically came out and said that this was just a crime of opportunity, that Jaquita had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this guy, dude, he had no real record prior to this. He had no red flags that would make people go, aha, that makes total sense. Like, he wasn't a guy that had gotten in no trouble. He had had a couple little things with the law here, but the only thing that was violent that he ever did was when he was younger. When he was 15, he and a group of friends assaulted a 13-year-old boy, leaving him with a broken arm and swollen jaw. And in 1993, he allegedly tried to break into a car, and he didn't serve any time for this. It didn't even end up on his record because he performed 40 hours of community service at a Boys and Girls Club, which again is horrifying when you consider that this guy was around kids. And the only other thing he really did, which was just a year before Jaquita was killed, wasn't violent. It was like implied threatened violence. Basically, I guess Alex parked his car on some wet asphalt and the construction worker complained because, like, dick move, bro, right? Don't park on my wet concrete that I just fucking laid. And Alex responded to him saying, quote, holler at me again and I'll shoot your ass. But again, no charges were brought in this situation either. So this murder and him being accused of this murder seemed to come out of fucking nowhere for everybody who knew him. And people were shocked, particularly his neighbor Dolores. Poor Dolores, dude. I guess, like, apparently once the investigation started to ramp up, Alex went to Dolores for like everything, described as his, quote, listening post. He would go to her to talk about the case a lot because the police were questioning him a lot. So he would go to her and talk about the fact they were questioning him and tell her, like, I don't know why they're looking into me. I didn't do it. And she said that he said, quote, if someone did that to my daughter, I'd hunt him down myself. I don't have anything to hide. I didn't do it? And at the time, it's like, well, nobody said you did. And also, how can you, as a father of a daughter who can like think this, like if someone did this to my daughter, I would fucking destroy them, and then go on and do this to someone else's daughter? But she said he would keep coming to her and complaining to her about police questioning him, about police asking him the same questions over and over. He said that he knew he was going to be somebody that police wanted to talk to because he had admitted to seeing her and helping her, back onto her bike. And she said that when she heard this, that he did that made total sense to her that he would do that, because that's just how he was. She said that she had 2 kids herself and that he was always fiercely protective of these kids. She said that if she had even been in her house and she was like yelling at her toddler who was 4 years old, he would come to her house and be like, stop yelling at that baby. Like he would come to defend the baby and be like, don't yell at that baby. And then tell her that if she didn't stop, he was going to grab her or tickle her to make her stop. She said the first day that she even felt weird about him was the day that he came back from giving his blood. She said that there was something about that was it just hit her weird. She said that she was trying to keep it in her mind that like this was normal, that they were just taking his blood to exclude him. But I think what was happening is that her mind was putting pieces together, especially pieces of the puzzle that showed how weird he was the night that Jaquita went missing and how he had needed her car. Specifically, she said that Alex had come pounding on her door the night that Jaquita went missing. He came pounding on her door. And when she opened it, he looked stressed, he looked frazzled, and he basically begged her to borrow her car so that he could go visit a sick aunt who lived on 35th Avenue. This is what he was telling her. She said that he was spooky and breathless and insistent that he needed a car. And she said that initially she suggested, like, why don't you walk? It's just a couple of blocks. Like, why do you need to drive if it's just down the street? But she said that he was adamant that he needed a car and he needed it right then. So she let him borrow the car. He was gone 20 minutes and he came and gave the car back. And she said the whole thing was very weird because usually he was this playful, fun guy, the guy who's going to grab you or tickle you if you don't stop being mean to your kid. But now he was serious and he was weird until he brought the car back. She said once the car was brought back, he was back to his usual fun self. He was back to the guy who would run up on you and tickle you when you weren't paying attention. And he straight up told her, like, see, I told you I'd get the car back in one piece. Now, the way she describes him as this fun, playful energy in the neighborhood is apparently how a lot of people saw this guy. He was well known and mostly well liked in the neighborhood. Did he walk around shirtless, blasting his stereo and also sometimes shoot a BB gun into your fence? Yes, but was he also super pleasant and somebody you wanted to hang around with and have a beer with, who was super nice to all the kids? Also, yes. He was the friendly neighborhood goof. He was the guy who would buy candy and ice cream for all the neighborhood kids, which in hindsight, again, yikes, but also that's who he was to people. One neighbor, her name was Lillian, was particularly shocked, and she had a really hard time coming to terms with the fact that he did something like this because the two were friends. Their kids were friends. I guess she had a kid who was also a toddler, another toddler girl who would often play with his toddler. And she said that she trusted him to like watch the two girls while she would leave to go like run an errand. She said that the two girls were like best friends and inseparable. So she left her daughter alone with this guy who did what he did. To rationalize it, she said that like he must have snapped, that something had to have triggered him because it didn't make sense to her otherwise how he could do something like this. Because we haven't even gotten into the specifics of what he did. But we will, because he does describe it. And I'm truly putting it off as long as possible because it's horrific. But the way this woman Lillian felt, the way that she felt like he couldn't have done this. If he did this, he had to be triggered. He had to have snapped. This seemed to be the sentiment to a lot of people who knew him. Like they couldn't believe that he would willingly, like consciously choose to do what he did. And even after he was arrested, I think it was 4 different family members came and stood outside the courthouse and protested his innocence. And one woman, I believe this was his partner, though it wasn't expressly stated that it was, she said at this time, quote, "He wouldn't do this. We have children. This will all be a different story when the truth comes out. All you have now is a suspect." Which, denial is a strong one. Denial is strong with this one. Denial is a strong drug, but also if you've been with this person and you've never seen any sign of them being a bad person, you have kids and you have a daughter with them, I can see how it would be incredibly difficult to just change your brain to accepting that they would do what he did. But the thing is, he admitted to it. He admitted to doing it, and Jaquita's bike was found in his apartment complex. But back to Dolores. Even though she had trouble believing that this could be the case, once he was arrested, she did go to police and she told them about him. She told them that he had used her car, and immediately they got the car, they took lab samples, and they told her, like, it's very likely that he used your car to dispose of this little girl's body. And she said of this, and I quote, "I feel betrayed. I feel really used. I just don't understand. I gave him the benefit of the doubt for 2 weeks. I'm torn up by this." And you know what? She absolutely has the right to feel betrayed. A lot of people have the right to feel betrayed by Alex, especially after it was released what he admitted he did. According to his confession and the evidence, Alex encountered Jaquita while she was out riding her bike. The two didn't know each other. Her family said that they had never met, but it was likely that they had seen each other while she was out riding the bike because they went to the same corner store. He was in the neighborhood. They likely had encountered each other, but they didn't know if they had ever spoke. Now, somehow, he was able to convince this girl to go back to his apartment. And according to him, he was able to do this by telling her that she could come and play with his PlayStation. Now, once inside his home, once the door was closed and there was no way for her to escape, Alex started to touch her on her arms and on her legs. And she wasn't having it, so she pushed him away. And in response to this, he reacted with force. He pushed this child down onto a mattress that was in his living room, and he violated her. And according to him, while he did this, she laid there silently with just her arms up in front of her chest in like a cross position, as if trying to protect herself from an animal. After he was done, he panicked. He said he was afraid of getting caught. He was ashamed of what people would think if they knew he had done this, because this is a fucking shameful thing to do, and he would rightfully be ashamed. And most importantly, he didn't want to be behind bars for the rest of his life. So he murdered the only witness to what he did. He murdered Jaquita. He pinned her down with his legs and then, quote, put his big hands on her neck and literally squeezed the life out of her. He then wrapped her body in a sheet, asked Dolores to borrow her car, loaded Jaquita's body into Dolores' car, and drove the 15 blocks to that field where he disposed of her like a piece of trash before leaving on a fishing trip with his buddies. This man, this male, this father dude, like, how do you, as a father of a child, of a little girl, do something like this? I don't understand it. This is the question I have, and this is the question that Jaquita's family had. Her father said that he was relieved that there had been an arrest, but was completely in shock to know that it was somebody that he knew. Okay, like he said, they weren't close. They didn't have like a friendship or anything, but they'd talked before. They would nod when they saw each other on the street. He could literally stand on his back porch and look into Alex's house. Her father said he just couldn't believe it because he always had this mindset that you're supposed to like love thy neighbor, but thy neighbor in this case was a monster. And Jaquita's uncle Julius said that the arrest was bittersweet and said specifically, quote, think about the loss of a loved one for 2 minutes and then multiply that by 1,000. And then, man, there was her poor aunt that she lived with, the one who like raised her for all these years, who she loved. She said that she knew something was wrong when Jaquita stopped calling her, right? Because she had been there for the month visiting her parents and she had called her every day. She had been calling her 3 times a day. And then there was just radio silence. Her cousin said like they never would have thought that anything like this would happen in their family, and especially not to Jaquita, because she knew how to be safe. She was smart. She knew not to talk to strangers, and yet she was gone, and this was heartbreaking. Her older brother, Keena, said of losing his sister, and I quote, I just want to tell her I love her so much, and I'm going to miss her. Now back to Alex. He was arrested and he was charged with Jaquita's murder along with the special circumstances of rape and lewd acts with the child. And he was facing the death penalty. Which, listen, I know the death penalty in general is controversial, and I don't think I've ever actually gotten into my view on the death penalty on my channel, and arguably or admittedly it's changed a bit in doing this exact thing that I'm doing now, which is talking to you about true crime on the internet. But what I will say is that if we are in a world where the death penalty exists, right? We are in a world where the death penalty exists. What type of case, if not this exact type of case, merits the death penalty? This is what I ask you. The assistant DA handling this case, a man named James Anderson, said that what Alex did crossed a line, And then he said specifically, and I quote, "You look at the vulnerability of the victim. An innocent little child just dallying along on her bicycle gets beset by this guy. Then to prevent discovery, he kills her. So it's compounded. You have a crime on top of a crime. Then he desecrates the body by dumping the girl. He crossed the line." And I don't know specifically the line the assistant DA was talking about that he crossed, but for me, it's the line from human to monster to beast. You can't do something like this to a child and still exist with the rest of us. Like, I'm not fucking interested. You can't sit with us. You can't violate a child because clearly you have a problem and you can't control yourself, and then kill her to hide getting caught, to choke the life out of a child because you're afraid you're going to get caught for the shitty things that you do. I don't want you around me, bro. Like, I don't. Now, when Alex was first arrested and he had his hearing where he was able to enter his plea and the attorneys talked about the case, Jaquita's family was just in tears. Like, when they talked about the special circumstances in this case, it was too much. Her aunt said, like, how do you do this? The same question I've had through this whole freaking case. How do you do this when you have a child of your own little girl? She said that, like, when she first saw him in the courtroom, she had trouble controlling herself, but she did it. And she said of this, and I quote, "I wanted to jump over the counter and get him myself because you just don't do this to kids." Her uncle, the one that was the last one to see her alive, said the whole thing was just hard for him to believe, and then said specifically, and I quote, "Why would he do this to a young girl? Why would he take her life? I really want justice done." Now, once the trial actually started, the prosecution really went in. Their opening statements were over an hour and a half, and all throughout that, there were images of Jaquita's body flashing on the screen, and Alex did not look up even once. The prosecutor said that Jaquita went out on her bike that day to, quote, "escape the ugliness in her home," referring to her parents' drug use and her mother's sex work, and said that once she was out in the world, she was again, quote, "confronted with complete and utter terror." The prosecutor then asked, where did Jaquita's quest for fun take her? And then answered by saying that it led her to being on her back on the floor in Alex's apartment. And I'm sorry that you have to hear this, but with, quote, "a mouthful of vomit and nail marks embedded in her neck." He then said that Alex violated her little body before taking his big hands and choking the life out of her. He then added that Alex had thrown her in the weeds where, quote, "ants got to feast on her body until morning," and then ended by saying, quote, "Jaquita Mack died with her eyes open, her pants down around her ankles, staring at the man who just raped her." Can you even imagine being this girl's family in that courtroom? A nightmare doesn't cover it. It really doesn't cover it. Now, when the defense gave their opening statement, it was pretty concise. It only lasted a couple of minutes, and they basically just told the jury not to jump to conclusions, right? To wait for all of the evidence. They weren't going to try to say that Alex didn't do it. That would have been a stupid thing for them to do. It was clear that he did it. They had taken his DNA. They had proven that he had did it. Basically, all they were trying to do was keep him from being executed. Like, that was their job. And they were going to do this by stating that there was mishandling of evidence at the lab, and also saying that though the prosecution was claiming that there was sodomy involved here and that would be a special circumstance that would enhance his sentencing, right? They were trying to say that there was no proof that actually happened. Even though Alex had admitted that he did it, his attorney was basically saying that Alex had been drinking heavily that evening, so anything that he said happened should be taken with a large grain of salt, essentially. And then what Alex said is that he, quote, "probably raped her," not that he actually did. And I don't know about you, but drunk or not, I think I would remember something like that. I wouldn't be in that situation, but you know what I mean? Now, I don't know how this guy, his name's Horowitz, the defense attorney, I don't know how he does his job. Honestly, it seems impossible, especially because in looking in this case, I looked into the defense attorney and I found that his wife, Pamela, was actually murdered in 2005. So to have that happen, then go on to represent defendants seems like it would be incredibly hard. And he did actually say that this case would be the last death penalty case that he handled. And he said specifically of this, quote, "I just don't want to be doing these kinds of cases. It's just not where I want to be because of the emotional aspect and where I want to put my energy, which, valid. It seems like a tough place to put your energy. Now, the prosecution countered everything the defense said and was like, listen, the defense is trying to tell you that there's no proof that this happened, that Alex did this to Jaquita, but like there's overwhelming evidence that he did, not just in the DNA, but also in his literal words. As I said before, after Alex confessed to police, he also wrote 3 letters. One was to his wife or partner, one was to his daughter, his 3-year-old daughter, and one was to Jaquita's family. In the letter to his own family, he wrote that he thinks something is wrong with him. And in the letter to Jaquita's family, he said, quote, "Hate the sick man that I have become. I had no right to take the little girl that you love." And the sick man is right. Only a sick man could do what he did. He literally said that he just squeezed and wanted it all to end. And about this, those statements, the prosecution said that was textbook deliberation and said specifically, quote, "When you take your hands and put them around the neck of another human being and you do it for the length of time he did, there's no other conclusion. The defendant was doing that because he wanted to kill Jaquita. He squeezed so hard that he left marks on her neck. There is no other possible intent." With that, the jury was sent to deliberate. Deliberations actually took 4 days, which I don't know, seems insane to me. It seems pretty cut and dry. But then again, I wasn't on that jury. I'm just reading about it after the fact. And hindsight really does clear things up quite a bit. But after these 4 days, the jury came back with their verdict. And they had found Alex DeMolle guilty of the first-degree murder of Jaquita Mack, along with the special circumstances, and they recommended that he be given the death penalty. But the final decision regarding his sentencing would be left up to the judge. When Alex heard his fate, he put his hands in his hands in his head. He put his hands into his head. He put his head into his hands and cried. And Jaquita's family was relieved. His attorney said that it was inevitable, that he knew his client was going to be found guilty. He's like, this is just the case of a totally normal guy who does nothing violent in his entire life, just switching on a dime. And then literally was like, how does that happen? This is crazy. And he was talking about his own client. Now, I didn't even mention this in this case yet. I don't know why it just dawned on me when I was thinking about the sentencing, but the legal system worked incredibly slow in this case. And it wasn't until 8 years after the murder that Alex would finally be sentenced. Now, during his sentencing hearing, Alex's attorney, who I believe was a totally new attorney, I don't think it was the same one who represented him in the trial, but this attorney said or asked that Alex's life be spared, saying that he is a truly caring individual. This attorney literally said that Alex was the best person that they had ever represented. They said that Alex is truly sorry for what he did and that this was a total departure from who he is. He said his client was not a violent man and said that he had never really been involved in any trouble with the law, which I already illustrated that there were this couple of things, but that's really all there was. So they were asking for life in prison instead of the death penalty, basically, and said that this sentence would in no way minimize what he had done because what he had done was so severe, but said that Alex should not be judged and should not be sentenced based on the one terrible thing he had done in his life, that no person should be held to the worst thing they had ever done. I can't remember exactly how they worded it, but that was the sentiment. And it's like in some ways I can understand that because a person isn't all bad or all good. But at the same time, this level of bad, I feel like I have the right to judge you on that. I just do. His attorney also made sure to let the court know that his entire family would suffer if he was executed because he's just a gentle giant who had never hurt anyone in his life, who had never hurt any kids. He was around kids all the time, in the streets, in the church, in his family, and he had never hurt anybody. He said that Alex was the caregiver for his daughter, and he was just a totally normal family man, and that his family is totally normal and that they need him, and said that this whole situation was just a tremendous tragedy. So the prosecution disagreed and said that if any case merited the death penalty, it was this one, and said specifically, quote, "If you come into our community and harm our children, you can expect the death penalty." He then said that Alex's conduct showed that he deserved no sympathy whatsoever. then, and this is graphic, but I imagine was also very effective in the courtroom. The prosecutor took out a styrofoam head. So it was just like a head and a neck. And it was meant to represent Jaquita's head. And he then placed his hands around the neck of this styrofoam head and squeezed hard for 1 minute, telling the courtroom that this was the minimum amount of time it would have taken for Alex to kill Jaquita this way. Now, I'll tell you, I don't know if I could handle being in the courtroom and seeing that. Like, it sounds incredibly traumatizing. And I mean, her family had already been traumatized just in losing her how they did. Her brother said of this, quote, "She was the link. That link's now been broke. It's gone and it won't come back." He added that he holds a lot of guilt because he was her older brother. And he feels like it was his job. It was his duty to protect her. And the fact that he wasn't able to gives him guilt and pain that he can't describe, and pain that simply will not go away. The presiding judge over the case said Alex committed a, quote, cold-blooded, premeditated murder. He also told Alex that he was a predator who had committed, quote, a cruel, senseless, depraved, and vicious act. The judge then sentenced Alex DeMolle to the death penalty, and when this was announced, Alex had no visible reaction. The judge then told Jaquita's family that he realizes that the judicial system can be, quote, woefully inadequate in handling these types of cases, but said that he hopes that Alex's sentencing would bring them some type of peace. And at least for her Aunt Verna, her guardian, the fact that Alex is going to be put to death does bring some peace, despite the fact that Jaquita is never coming home. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of 11-year-old Jaquita Mack. I hope that you found it informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want on looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Jaquita with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. How does a person like Alex, who had never done anything before and who had his own daughter, go on to do what he did to Jaquita? I don't understand it. There has to be a disconnect here, but we see it time and time again. And I just don't understand how a person can do something like that. And then I'm curious, do you believe that he deserved the death penalty, or would that be your choice? Because there are definitely some people who are like, fuck yeah, put this dude to death. But there are some people who believe that he deserves to live a long life thinking about what he did. But at the same time, like, does a person like that even feel guilty? He says he does, but does he? Like, let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm curious to hear what you think. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you put a suggestion on the list, whenever you put a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it. So if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And if you've made it this far, I just want to let you know that I have now turned the audio from my YouTube videos into a podcast. So if you search True Crime with BRATTERSTEIN on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon, there might be other places too. But if you search True Crime with BRATTERSTEIN, it'll bring up my audio. And if you could please listen and give it a 5-star review if you think it deserves it. I just want to get it out in the algorithm, because you have to hit like so many listens, so many hours, so many follows before you're even like out there. So I would greatly appreciate it. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here. Then you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.